Okay, welcome back to your afternoon session for Journalism and Media Week. Are you enjoying it so far? That's the sort of energy we like. That's the sort of and we've got a couple of schools in with us as well. Woo. There was less there. Let's try that again. We've got some colleges in with us. Well, it was okay. It was okay. We'll build you up. When you come here, that's when you go big woo. We've got a brilliant session for you right now. We're going to be talking VFX. We've done some special effects this morning, and now we're going to do some VFX. Make some noise for Ben Louden!
Thanks, man. That was weird. So, Orange Hoodie Crew, liking it. Where are you guys from? They're ambassadors. Okay. Okay, so they're not here on like a sort of... No, never mind. Right. Yes, I'm Ben, the aforementioned Ben. I'm head of studio and VFX supervisor at Viridian VFX. Viridian VFX is in York. That's York, for those of you who haven't been to York, which is in England. So we have been doing visual effects for about 12, 13 years now, and we love being in York. That's why we're in York, and we're sort of trying to fly the flag for Northern/Yorkshire filmmaking, but also visual effects in particular. There aren't too many people doing visual effects in Yorkshire, but we're trying to sort of buck the trend a little bit because we love it. So we started off as a partnership with York University way back, 12, 13 years ago now. And some local film producers basically came to the uni and said, we want to make an entirely green screen feature film. So the whole thing shot on green screen and then replace it with kind of abstract backgrounds. A little bit like Sin City, if anyone's seen Sin City, but like a really low budget version of that. And a completely different story, so not like Sin City at all. And they had very little money to do so it's kind of on an indie film budget. And obviously what do you do when you don't have much money? You go and find students to do some work. So we were one of the first sort of cohort, and there was 4 of us essentially hired to make this film. And the film was called The Knife That Killed Me. And sort of bizarrely, we delivered it to Universal Pictures, and it was kind of an indie. That's basically one of the stills from the film. So it was very abstract, very kind of experimental, as you can kind of see, with some reviews. I'm not quite sure if they're real, but they're reviews. And so that really kind of kicked off the company. And essentially, we weren't just hired as visual effects artists. We were kind of filmmakers. So we had to figure out how to shoot stuff on green screen. We literally built that green screen that you can see there. We painted it ourselves. We painted all the little markers ourselves. And we spent 4 months camped out in the studio figuring out how to shoot green screen effectively for a feature film. So especially with a feature film with not much money, doing lots and lots of green screen takes a very long time. So we had to be super efficient with it. And that really was our kind of baptism of fire, if you like. And from that grew our visual effects company, essentially. So we had The Knife That Killed Me. That was released in 2014, but we started in 2011. So that was 3 years of our lives that we'll never get back. And then we thought that went well, so let's do another one. So we did Macbeth, which was another fully green screen film. So really the genesis of the company was about filmmaking as much as visual effects artists. We weren't just hired as people who do visual effects. We were hired to kind of figure out how to do this whole thing. And then that kind of really, one of our USPs really as a visual effects company is that you come to us for kind of creative solutions and not just visual effects. And you're talking to the people who are doing the work often. We don't have layers and layers of producers. We like to get our artists involved with speaking directly to sort of directors and producers or visual effects supervisors or clients that we're working with. And we also like to take our team out on set as much as we possibly can. So I'm a firm believer that when you're doing visual effects, what you're really trying to do is sort of replicate all of the aspects of filmmaking, but digitally. And the best way to learn how to do that and to learn about that is to get out on set and see how it happens for real, because filmmaking is not reality. Some of you may have sort of realized this about filmmaking. It's a pseudo-reality, and a lot of filmmaking language and how things are done in a specific way that you're all used to seeing. And visual effects is about replicating that. It's not necessarily about replicating the real world. So the more that you can understand about how a camera sees the world, how lenses work, how production design works, all of these things, and you learn that by going out on set and seeing things, or getting a camera and playing with yourself, playing with this stuff for yourself. The basic point there is, like, we feel that a lot of visual effects these days is kind of quite service provision. It's sort of, do this, here's some digital work, send it back. We try to be more collaborative in our way of doing things, and that's essentially comes from our sort of filmmaking background in these first two films. So then we went on to do sort of another 10 years worth of indie films from there. So the studio that was acquired to make the first two green screen films then went on to do a whole bunch of what you might call more normal films, so dramas and things like that. So we inherited a lot of the visual effects from those films and continued to build our kind of skill set. And then sort of fast forward 10 years, we got an opportunity to work on House of the Dragon for HBO. So that was sort of almost 3 years ago now, which really was just a massive turning point for us as a company, as you can probably imagine. They started off testing us with a few bits of work, and then it went from sort of a few weeks' work to 5 months' work, and we built a really great relationship with the filmmakers on that show. And that sort of, once you've done something like that, the doors open a little bit and people take notice. So we started working on various different shows for various different distributors. And so now we sort of find ourselves in a slightly different world to what we've been living in prior to that. You know, we were very much in the indie world. We were very much in sort of low budget filmmaking, usually local. Low budget filmmaking is sort of really is what sort of defined as anything under sort of 10 million really for the feature, but most of the films we were working on were sort of in and around the 1-2 million mark for feature film, which isn't very much. Sounds like a lot, isn't very much. But you know, you fast forward to stuff like this, and it's like, you know, the budgets on this is several hundred million. So it's just a totally different thing. One of the kind of different things for us working on shows like this is that you're usually a part of several companies working on the same show. So you'll have a visual effects team that are hired by HBO or Netflix or whatever, and they sort of run the show. So they go out on set, they work out what all the visual effects is going to be, they work with the director and producer to sort of build the world or whatever it is. And then when it comes into post, you have the edit, and then essentially once the thing is edited, they hire a whole load of visual effects companies to actually do the visual effects. So for instance, on House of the Dragon, we were one of about 7 or 8 companies. Chaos, we were one of sort of 5 or 6. Heart of Stone, very similar. And the reason they do that is because visual effects still takes a really long time, even these days, even with AI. So, you know, you can be a year in post on something like this, and you can have 7 companies working on it, several hundred VFX artists work on it, and that's still only just enough to get this over the line. So there's a phenomenal amount of work that goes into these shows in general, but especially in the visual effects world, it's still very painstaking, takes a very long time, and is still very expensive. So this was very different to kind of the world we'd been in before, where we were sort of, you know, if we're working on an indie film or one of our experimental films, we are the only company working on it. So we are very much involved with the directors, the producers, the writers directly, and we're sort of creatively involved and technically involved and sort of, if you like, a much bigger part of the show. On stuff like this, we are a smaller part of the show. But actually, one of the things that was, I guess, kind of like slightly surprising is, you know, we felt going into a show like, for example, House of the Dragon, that we would be a drop in the ocean and we'd barely get any attention, and it would just be sort of do this and send it back. which is sort of not really who we are as a company. But actually, the sort of surprising thing is that the people who are working on these shows are actually seeking out, where they can, they're seeking out smaller companies to work with because they like the more collaborative nature of it. They like being able to work with people who sort of want to have an input on stuff. They don't want to do it in a factory. They don't want to do it in a factory in another country or in a massive company where it just churns it out and sends it back. Because in the end, VFX is there to help create their film. And like any other part of filmmaking, that is a creative process, it's a collaborative process. And if you sap the creativity out of it, then it shows, and the shows start to get more bland and more rinse and repeat. We won't name any names, but Marvel. But you kind of get the point really about the bigger the show. Sometimes these things can get diluted, and there's just so many people involved that it is a real task to kind of try and keep that essence of that show. Chaos is a really good example of this. So Chaos took a really long time to make, and it was one of those shows that I think, I don't want to speak for the creators, but we went down to the sort of cast and crew screening for this, and the creator, Charlie herself, was talking about how, they tried to create a world that was very kind of out there. It's very kind of hyper real. The script is quite out there. I think if you're Netflix and you're making something like this, it's a little bit of a risk. They're spending quite a lot of money on this thing. It's a brand new world. It's kind of out there, and it needs to kind of hit. So there was a lot of tinkering done with it in post. There was a lot of editing, and so we were a part of Chaos for, I think, more than 18 months. There were other companies working on it for more than 2 years, and that was just a product of the fact that they were trying to, just find that right edit. Filmmaking is all basically done in the edit. You can make something good or bad in the edit. And they were sort of tinkering with this because, in the end, it cost them a lot of money and they don't want it to fail. It's a massive shame that they're sort of not renewing it for season 2 because it did do very well. But also in the end, it just cost them a lot of money. And this sort of sad state of affairs at the moment in the industry is budgets are tightening. People are, these kind of companies are making less now. So they're looking to find ways to cost cut, and that is just the kind of sad fact of where we are. Even when they make great shows like this, it's hard for them to kind of continue. So this was our kind of step into this world. As I said, like House of the Dragon for us was, our kind of big turning point. We did a lot on season 1. We did a bunch on season 2. Hopefully be on season 3 as well. They're sort of starting filming that soon. Visual effects, if anyone doesn't know what visual effects is, the best way to show what it is basically by a show reel. So I will show you a bit about what we do. So that's kind of some of our more recent work. And a lot of what you've seen on there is what we kind of call invisible effects. So visual effects is made up of a whole different, bunch of different disciplines, but we generally tend to split between, there's kind of two main avenues. So there's kind of CGI, and then there's kind of what we would call invisible effects. And CGI is kind of the big stuff. So it's like Star Wars space sequence is fully computer generated. Very obviously is, because those things can't exist. But you kind of suspend disbelief when you watch it, because if it's done well enough and it's telling a good story, then you're happy to kind of accept it. The other side of the industry, which is really where most of the volume is, but actually is most of the stuff that hopefully you guys don't notice, is the invisible effects. So it's the stuff that is in every single TV show that you will watch pretty much ever now. Even any kind of level of drama, any kind of level of documentary will have at least some invisible effects work on it. And that could range from anything from, changing a sign on a shop front that didn't get licensed to show itself, all the way through to completely changing backdrops in, something like House of the Dragon. So what we do a lot of is this kind of invisible effects work, and in the end, like, if we've done our job right, you guys aren't really supposed to know that there's any VFX in it when you watch the show. So, if you do spot that there's visual effects, that's when we haven't done our job properly. That's also when it kind of throws you out the story and you start to sort of not really tune in or not really believe what's happening, right? So filmmaking is just about creating an illusion. Obviously, it's about telling a story first and foremost, but in the end, you have to create the illusion to suspend the disbelief about what it is that you're creating. Westeros is clearly not a real place, but when you watch it, you kind of believe that it might be, just for that hour that you're watching the film. And that is largely down to production design, obviously hair, makeup, all those things, and visual effects all combined to essentially just create an illusion that you might be in a place that you're not, for instance. So invisible effects is a huge part of the industry. You guys might think of CGI and you might think Marvel and you might think Star Wars. Really, that's a really small percentage of the industry, and that's reserved for the massive companies that have hundreds and hundreds of people. You need hundreds and hundreds of people to do massive spaceships and huge Marvel sequences like that. But actually, the bulk of the industry is, there's a lot of stuff in the showreel you just watched there on a ITV drama that we did last year called Passenger. It's a kind of cop drama with a twist, and it's a really good show. I would recommend watching it. But if you sort of sat and watched that at home on a Monday night, you wouldn't expect there to be much visual effects in it. In fact, you might not even know that there's any. But on a show like that, there was, I think in total, about 400 shots. So, that's a lot of individual shots that have been effectively, manipulated in post by VFX artists to create something that wasn't there before. So just a few shots here from House of the Dragon Season 1 to talk about, really. Quite often, invisible effects work is used for windows. So the reason that happens is that filming in a studio environment is a lot easier, a lot cheaper usually, and a lot more controllable than going to a castle where you might want to film inside a bedroom for a scene that's in, a castle in King's Landing or whatever. So 9 times out of 10, these are set builds that are done in a studio. And obviously if they're done in a studio and you have windows, out the window is going to be the wall of the studio. So 9 times out of 10, you'll have blue screen, white screens even, and obviously it's then the sort of task of the VFX artist to put the background in and obviously get rid of that blue and make you believe that you are in a different place. So windows is a big thing. Also, ranging from this sort of thing where some of the biggest sets that I've ever seen, you can get a sense of scale here. Top left is sort of people stood on the balcony. This is just a full-blown set build of the castle courtyard in King's Landing. And it's just massive, but it's still not big enough to not see the woods in Leavesden and the car park on the other side. So again, it's just about extending that reality and making you believe that the rest of the castle and, the Godswood Tree and out to the sea. So it's a really small slither of the frame, and actually, if you're watching the show, you're probably watching down here. But it does just enough to sell that illusion to you that you are in a place that is not just a set built in a car park. Also for things like reshoots, so this happens a lot. So on this show in particular, a lot of stuff was filmed in Spain, in various kind of locations in Spain. And what they generally do on a show like this, and actually on lots of shows, is they'll have their main shoot, and they'll do a bunch of editing. Once they've got to the end of the edit, they'll kind of decide on maybe some bits that they need to improve the edit. So it might be, okay, this bit's kind of really working, but actually we need some more energy in this scene, and we need to shoot a different bit of dialogue here to make this scene really work. Or sometimes what was scripted doesn't actually come through very well in the edit, so they might change what was said, or they might change the scene in the edit. And in order to do that, they might just need to shoot a couple of extra lines, or they might need to shoot an entirely new scene. This sort of stuff happens a lot on the bigger budget stuff because they have money to do reshoots, and even on smaller stuff, you generally get reshoots. But instead of taking the whole crew back to Spain for what might amount to a couple of shots in the middle of a scene, which is the case in this particular shot, they will go to their studio and they'll build a wall that looks a bit like the place that they were in Spain. But they can't build a whole street because that would be insane and it would take too long and it would cost loads of money. But building a wall like that is not that expensive. Get a few extras in, do a couple of days shooting, and that's a lot cheaper than shipping the whole crew out to Spain to shoot this whole kind of scene again. So that, again, is where kind of visual effects comes in extending that small piece of wall into making it look like you're in a kind of street scene. And actually, on a shot like this, what we actually use to create that background is a LiDAR scan, which is basically a massive sort of hyper accurate kind of 3D scan of the place that they originally shot in. So we have all of these assets, and we're able to kind of reuse them and place them into the background using a combination of photographs and the 3D scan to sort of effectively rebuild the original location. So they build a bit of the wall, we do the rest of the background, chuck it in. This shot's over in about 1.2 seconds and nobody ever notices, but you probably would notice if there was a big green screen in there. So again, it's just about creating that illusion and selling it. And then there's kind of, so the sort of flip side of the invisible effects work is somewhere in between CG and invisible effects. There are these kind of one-off creative shots that we get sometimes. So this point in the show in particular was quite a sort of poignant moment in the story. They sort of hold this dagger into the fire, and the dagger sort of glows, and when it glows up, it sort of reveals essentially this kind of prophecy, which is in the kind of hieroglyph type sort of typeface, which is sort of relevant to the show. And this is kind of a really big moment in the show, super fun shot to work on. To give you an idea, like something like this, we will spend probably 2 people about 3 weeks on something like this, from start to finish. The reason it takes so long is that usually on something like this, there's a lot of creative input from our supervisors, who will be the client, and then their supervisors, who is the director for the episode, and then their supervisors, who is the showrunner, and then their supervisors, who are the exec producers for HBO. And usually when stuff gets kind of creative and crucial to the story, it will involve a lot more people in the decision-making process. So you kind of have to, you're doing creative work, but in the end, you have to know how to work with people. You have to know how to present different versions of things and try to collaborate in a way that gets you to an endpoint and doesn't just kind of spin the wheel and just keep going around in circles. So this is one of the kind of more technical and creative shots that we did on the show. And that is my last slide. So, thank you guys.
Hello, hey, it's me again. Thank you very much, Aman. We've got some time for questions. Has anyone got a question? I knew Alex would. Alex, and then across to Richard.
In your show reel, how difficult was it to model the snow, and what was like the most difficult thing to model when it came to like all your CG and VFX work?
Well, so the snow is a combination of sort of CG models, but it's also a lot of what we call DMP work, which is 2D work. So you can do a lot with Photoshop, and essentially, like, when it comes to invisible effects like that, you know, again, if you're watching the show, you're not meant to know that it wasn't snowy. The best way to do any visual effects, kind of full stop really, is to use photographic material. So don't always think CG, think, can I go and get a photograph of that thing that will do the same job? Because if it's a photograph, then lo and behold, it's going to look real, right? So wherever we can, we will try to use photographic assets, grab a load of photos together, bash them all up in Photoshop, and make them work for that particular shot. That's a lot of how we do things like that, where essentially, like, the snow is miles away on a mountain, so it can be a flat 2D, you know, essentially photograph, right?
Yeah.
Some of the more foreground stuff, where you can see depth and perspective in there is some CG in there. So we needed models and we needed to light that stuff to sort of make it work. In answer to your question as to what was the kind of most difficult thing to model in CG, if that's the question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw some of the kind of big spaceship stuff, so the stuff where it's exploding.
Yeah.
That just takes a really long time.
Fair enough.
Simple as that. And a lot of creative input and a lot of back and forth. Simulating fire and stuff is pretty tricky to do, to get that to look real. That stuff just takes ages. And obviously you can't, going back to the analogy about use a real photograph or use real footage, you can't get real footage of a spaceship blowing up. So you have to create it in CG, right? That's always the kind of thought process.
That's a shame. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, hi, Ben. Do you think it's important sometimes as visual effects to actually get to the set, because the way that a director of photography director might shoot something could have a major implication on the VFX later if they're shooting through, say, leaves in the foreground and things like that. It's going to make your job a lot harder. So, do you get to set?
Yes. Is there any way of pulling the slides back up? Can we pull the slides? Oh, there we go. I think it's probably me, to be fair. So, you mean like dangling? Yeah, like that, yeah.
That's a pile of extra work.
Yeah. And a really kind of wavy blue screen. Yeah, so, yes, we do. Any show that has a sort of, what you might call a significant amount of VFX, so any blue screen and upwards, you should always have a VFX supervisor on set. More than that, you should have a VFX supervisor in prep, because prep is really where decisions get made. On set, there's only so much you can change because you only have so much time. But yeah, we would always try to be on set to make the footage that's being collected essentially as efficient as possible for VFX. The reality of that, though, is that VFX is one department in several, and if any of you have ever been in any filmmaking sort of scenario, you'll know that it's all about sort of pushing and pulling between departments and relationships between departments and budgets and all these things. It's always a compromise. So even if we didn't supervise on House of the Dragon, there was a kind of a main supervisor. Even if that supervisor wanted to replace that blue screen with a flatter blue screen and remove those dangling lights, because it's going to make VFX harder, there's a whole load of people above him or her that will probably overrule him for either creative reasons or technical reasons. That blue screen in the background, just to give you an idea, is 3 stories high. It's just quite far away, and this whole set is on the sort of first floor. So this is a huge drape that they've spent 2 days rigging. The chances of them tweaking it or changing it are slim to none. When they're putting it up, there should be someone there sort of supervising and trying to make it better. But again, the reality is always you do the best you can, and it's very rarely sort of perfect because, you know, again, at the end of the day, VFX is only one part of the process. But yeah, like a shot like this takes us probably 3 times longer for having the dangling plants and for having an uneven blue screen. It's that kind of thing. You know, this goes from a sort of a 1.5 day shot to a week-long shot. So this will take somebody a week to composite accurately. So yeah, we tried to get on set.
Any more questions?
Hi, what sort of program do you use or software to use to edit all your video?
Yeah, so we kind of use industry standard software. So for compositing, we use Nuke by the Foundry. That's kind of industry wide. We do use Photoshop. We use Maya, which is a kind of 3D software application, and Houdini, which is also CG, also simulation stuff. That's kind of our main core of software. If you want to get into visual effects, there is really 2 strands to it. It's what we call 2D and 3D. 2D is compositing, which compositing is essentially Photoshop, but for moving image. And CG is creating CG models and making spaceships and making fire explosions and things. CG is kind of like maybe the sexier side of VFX, but as I was saying earlier, it's a very small percentage of VFX. It's reserved for the highest budget stuff. Very few people get to do that to that level. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go for it if you really like it, because it's great. And ultimately, you probably shouldn't get into VFX if you don't love it anyway, so do the thing that you like. But yeah, it's really kind of 2 strands. So 2D compositing is Nuke, 3D CGI, Maya, Blender, Houdini, that kind of thing.
Any more hands? There we go.
Well, we were listening to Lisa Holtworth earlier, and she was talking about the sort of like the impact of AI on writing. What's the impact of AI on VFX?
How long have you got?
Probably about 10, 12 minutes, I'm saying.
Okay, so look, I mean, this is clearly a sort of a debate that's much wider than visual effects. I mean, AI is coming to do loads of things, both good and bad, for all industries, really. For VFX specifically, at the moment, it's a great tool for us to use, and we are using it for some aspects of visual effects as just like any new tool, right? Just like any new software that makes something easier or better. In terms of the kind of existential threat, look, I mean, generative AI is getting insanely good and insanely quickly, and it doesn't take too much of a leap of the imagination to imagine it being, you know, good enough to start doing the stuff that we're doing out of the box in probably not too long a time. We were talking about this earlier with Anna, I think. Anna, who's there? And my sort of feeling on it is, when you're talking about creative work, I think that AI is coming. It's a tool for humans to use. And I think if you're a creative, you need to embrace it. That's number one. But number 2, you need to start thinking about where the value added is from humans now, right? So what is it that stands you apart from the AI? And I always feel like when you're talking about creative, collaborative stuff like this, it's insane how many people collaborate to make something like this. Ultimately, that's about the interface between humans. It's about relationships. It's about communication. It's about collaboration, that kind of magic when you get people in a room and ask them to, in a restricted time, in a restricted budget, be creative. That is, I think, the magic of filmmaking. It's also the magic of other creative industries. And I think that that's the value added. So in terms of visual effects, there will always be that interface. There will always be that kind of, I suppose, interpretation of a client brief, understanding of a client brief, trust between you and the clients, that ultimately you will deliver what they want. How you then do it and what tool you use ultimately is the thing that is probably going to change. But that kind of interface and that relationship and that collaboration, I think, or I hope, is the thing that will continue to, make the stuff that we create together unique as set apart from entirely AI-generated stuff. There was a quote from a VFX, sort of famous VFX supervisor, not that long ago, and he was talking about how it was like sort of AI creates great art, but humans create meaningful art. And I think, again, that comes back to, you might think about traditional portrait artists and things like that. Their work lasts. And why does it last when computers can sort of just click a button make stuff that's arguably technically better now? I think it's because of the meaning behind it. I think people care that stuff is made by a human, and they care about the human stories that humans are trying to tell. So I think that's the thing that will sort of, continue throughout this, technological revolution that is coming. It's coming very, very fast. And yeah, it's probably going to take some jobs along the way. But, I think you have to embrace it and learn how to use it and stay ahead of it. And hopefully that means we all create better stuff because it's easier. So that's maybe the upside.
I've got one cheeky question since you're here. Does Viridian take on placement students at all?
Yes and no. We're a small company, so there's 20 of us, and that includes the post-production team that we have. So we have traditionally done kind of undergrads, so people who haven't graduated yet, usually second years. If you're interested in VFX, and if you're doing a visual effects course, or at least you're a hobbyist and you have a show reel that can show what you can do, we do kind of 2-week internships that usually run during the summer, although again, because we're a small company, it's more like when we have a gap to do it in. That's just the reality. It's kind of, I would say it's something that is always a sort of semi-open door. And then when we come to a sort of period of time when we're looking to do internships, we will get back in touch with people who have applied and say, look, do you want to come and do something over this time? That's usually the way it kind of works. But yeah.
Any more questions before we... Oh, right at the back. Give me a second. I'm old.
Hello. Oh God. Hi mate. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the controversy behind the quality on high budget films having kind of questionable CGI, and is there any kind of real solution to it that you can think of, really?
Yeah. So, look, what's happening generally is budgets are getting smaller. And generally, when budgets get smaller, people's expectations don't get smaller. They're just like, oh, you can do the same thing again, right? But we're just gonna give you less money. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on certainly visual effects companies to sort of sing that tune in a way, and to, there's a lot of companies that can't say no to, for example, again, we won't name the company that begins with M. But they're notorious in the VFX industry. They really are, and I don't mind saying this in a recording because it's widely known. But they're trying to squeeze as much out of them as possible. And I think one of the reasons for that is that they're trying to be too ambitious with the stuff that they're doing, because they're always trying to better the previous thing that they did. But the thing that I think is perhaps the questionable part is they're trying to better it in terms of the bells and whistles, the shiny stuff, we've got to have another action sequence, we've got to have a bigger action sequence, when actually in reality, maybe focusing on the story and not necessarily, having just another 10 action sequences should be the thing that maybe this sort of money is diverted to. I don't know. I'm so far away from the decisions at that level. It's very hard for me to judge. The only other thing that I would say is that I'm not a fan of the term sort of questionable VFX. I'm not a huge fan of people like certain people who sort of talk about how great it is that their film doesn't have visual effects, right? Oh, there's no CGI in this, so you should all watch it. the reason I'm not a fan of that is because, first of all, those films have loads of CGI in them. So it's just massive disrespect for the people that are doing thousands and thousands of hours to create that illusion for that filmmaker. So first of all, disrespect, but second of all, I think that, like, I don't know, it's like on budgets like that, I don't think people who are in those positions of power should be underselling visual effects, because they need visual effects and they know they need visual effects. The reason I don't like the term kind of questionable or bad CGI is bad CGI is usually down to one of two things, like either overly ambitious filmmaking or not enough money. It's kind of as simple as that. Filmmaking, how good shows are in terms of how they look, so production values, and visual effects comes into that, like quality of production. So something like this is at the highest end. How good it looks, there's a completely linear relationship between budget and how good it looks. It's just as simple as that. The more money you spend, the more you put on screen, the better it looks. Story, not so much. It's still a script, you still need filmmakers, you still need people to tell good stories. So you can spend £500 million on a show, and it can still be not a good show if there wasn't a good script and there wasn't that kind of magic. It'll look amazing, and again, there's a big, obvious example of this that came out recently that did cost $500 million, you know, and that show looks incredible. Some of the visual effects in that is incredible, but of course it is, because they spent £100 million on it. So, you know, I think this, the term bad CGI and questionable always has to be in relation to, you know, the constraints they were put under. And I feel really sorry for some of these VFX companies that work on these massive shows. They put blood and sweat and tears into it, they get overworked, and in the end, the show gets like damned as having bad CGI, and it's nothing to do with the artists that are working on it. And then that perpetuates this idea of a bad reputation, perpetuates this idea of like, we can't have visual effects because it's all bad now, so we should just do it all for real. It's just a false sort of, I don't know, it's a false thing that's kind of put out there by filmmakers who want to sell this idea that sort of real is better. And don't get me wrong, I think real is better. It just is. But VFX has its purpose, and when it's kind of slapped down to say, you know, oh, visual effects is all awful nowadays, so why would we bother? It's just totally disingenuous, because it's a multi-billion-pound industry, and they sort of need us. But yeah, that's my rant. Over.
Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for Ben Louden. Now we've got a short break right now ahead of our next